What number is this? Is this number 100?
I think this might be 100. You're right.
We made it.
We made it. Long road. I don't know why that made me tired.
A lot of tough podcasts.
I think I had a reaction to that, thinking about all the time we've spent talking about CDNs and use effect. It's like, it's pretty good though, 100. That's pretty good. We probably should have prepared for 100. We probably should have done something special here. Now, if you've been with us the whole way and listened to every 100 episodes, that is impressive.
Yeah.
For all one of you out there, I commend you. Man, just so professional.
100 episodes. I still haven't
figured out how to work your technology.
The iPhone.
But you are wearing better socks than you were back in the day.
If I'm wearing shorts, I actually have to.
It's a great look, man. It's not that hard to make the look work when you have pants on. You just have to care.
No,
enough.
but you don't worry about it.
You don't worry about it. I don't even know what we're talking about today.
I got a few things, but I do want to hit. You just made a video on modules.
Just made a YouTube video on ES modules. We were talking about that before this. Learned a lot, man.
Yeah.
I've been trying to be better about making shorter videos more frequently because I think it's good for everyone. It's better for the production side. It's better for learning. You know, I've realized like learning these days, it's almost like language immersion. Someone said that on a podcast and I was like, that is true, where if you learn a foreign language, you go to a country and the way to learn it is like be immersed in it. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like the best way to learn these days, right? You're like listening to podcasts. You're like seeing things on Twitter. You're just getting little drips of info throughout your life or whatever. So anyways, I wanted to drip out a little thing about ES modules and imports because of these tools like Snowpack that are getting a lot of attention all of a sudden, it felt like. And it was like, why is this happening now? Right? Mm-hmm. And Evan Yu is working on Vite, and Jason Miller from Preact is like working on a build tool. Did you see his tweet?
No.
He's like, oh yeah, what if your build tool didn't have to run npm install? What if it started up in 100 milliseconds? What if it rebuilt in like 200 milliseconds or something like that? And it never went. It was 01. It was like a 01 algorithm. So it doesn't matter how big your project is. It stays that fast. And I was curious about all this stuff. So that led me down a rabbit hole. Big rabbit hole. Pretty interesting though, man. So just to recap kind of what we talked about basically is like the reason it was hard to explain is because it's all tied to ES modules and the history of modules in JavaScript. And it made me realize why it's so interesting and such a hard problem to solve. Whereas in every other programming language, like how long do Ruby developers waste time on how am I going to load a file? 0.
Yeah.
Or PHP developers or Python developers. And if you think about how much time has been invested and spent over the last 10 years figuring out how to answer that question in JavaScript, it's like it's insane. Mm-hmm. Truly insane. But then you realize it's because loading files on the server is easy because reading from disk is fast enough that it doesn't have any impact on the program that's running. So if I want to split one file into 2 files, it's basically a non-issue on the server because the one file that's running can load the other file that's sitting right next to it. But as soon as we want to do that in the web, the problem is the file that's running is on our user's device and the other file we want to load is on our server somewhere far away from it.
Yep.
So now loading that file becomes an actual material issue for the user experience. And that's what this is all about. Like all of this is about that. It's the fact that when you're running the code on the user's device, requiring another file that we wrote is an asynchronous operation. It has to be because you can't stop the world just to go fetch code over the network because the network is so much slower than reading file from disk.
Yeah, and stopping the world means like locking the UI. And people expect the website to be responsive where like in a server, you know, even though it's fast, you can still stop the world. You're not stopping it for a long time.
But even if you had a UI running in the server, like a command line tool, you can like reading file from disk is literally so fast that you don't actually care. Even if you were in a UI environment, because it's fast enough that you can just make the user wait because they're going to be waiting for like a millisecond.
Yeah. But I think
about it. There's like a lot of stuff you can do in a server environment that's fast enough that users don't have to wait. Like you don't have to call a function on another thread. You can just do it because it's fast enough.
I think there's something though, like the browser I expect to always be responsive.
But it would if the code was there. Think about if all the modules were loaded locally. You could actually synchronously load dependencies. Like if you had all of the files locally, it would just be like running a native app and you could just synchronously include dependencies.
Yeah. I was thinking more along the lines of like when I'm writing a server, no one is like, if I need to stop the world, I can totally stop the world and freeze everything.
Yeah.
Where in a UI, I can't because someone might just be typing in an input or something like that.
Right. Yeah. And that you run into that when not because of asynchrony, but if you have an expensive operation that's CPU blocking. So if the bottleneck is CPU, then you do have to consider that. But for most environments, loading files is not going to block the CPU enough that it's going to. You're not in a CPU constrained you're not in a CPU constrained environment, so loading files is not the problem. Like the operation of loading a file is not going to limit your CPU enough that it's going to affect the user interface.
Right, but my point is I can freeze a world while I load a file where like once I introduce a UI, I can't freeze the world. Like
it's not true. Because you can have a command line interface as a UI, but if it has to look, you can write a command line interface on the server that stops the world and loads a file as long as it's fast enough, which it basically is all the time.
Okay.
If you were writing a CLI tool,
I guess that's true.
You would just read file from disk.
If I was writing like a GUI that wasn't over the network, it was just a local GUI, I could import files from disk synchronously. Now, to be fair, like Node has asynchronous utilities. So if like hitting a database crosses that threshold where you actually want it to be asynchronous, and maybe like parsing a big CSV file crosses that threshold where it now needs to be asynchronous. But in general, if you were to like read file, if you were to just use require synchronously, it's going to be fine. But it's kind of interesting, right? Because like it all comes down to how long it takes. And then as soon as it takes long enough where you have to cross the synchronous to asynchronous bridge, like everything just becomes insanely complex. Yeah.
And like, I just didn't understand the full story until I made this video and had to explain it because like we've had CommonJS module system in Node forever. Why didn't we just use that so long ago in the browser in front-end JavaScript? Like we're all JavaScript programmers, right? But it actually turns out writing JavaScript in a server environment where the code that's running and the code that's stored, the other files, are in the same place makes it completely simple, like it is in Ruby and PHP and Python. But in front-end world, it's completely different. So it all comes down to this notion of the fact that we need to load dependencies asynchronously, why the module system for Node, CommonJS, doesn't work for the browser because it's based on like the synchronous require, basically. So that's where ES module specification came into being, and that's why it's statically analyzable. Like we've known that, we've talked about that before, how ES modules are like statically analyzable, right? Like you can't use a variable in the import name. You have dynamic imports, that's separate, right? The reason you can't use a variable in the import name is because it needs to be static. Oh, so it can be tree shaken. And, that's kind of how I thought about it before. Like if you can statically analyze your import graph, you can tree shake things. Why is that important for the web? Oh, because we're shipping our code to our users, and if we ship less, it's better. But there's another reason that's actually more important, which is that the browser is going to be the one who can do the job of traversing the import statements. And it needs to be able to do that without running the program so that it can be intelligent about how and when it loads all those dependencies.
Okay.
Whereas in like PHP or whatever, any server-side thing, it can just run. It hits a require statement. Oh, let's just go get it. We'll get it, and then we'll come back, and we'll keep going.
Okay, because like a require statement on the server is like just as much work as running like an if statement. It's just, it's just small CPU.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Whereas like, again, because of how long it takes to load a file over the network, it now becomes part of the problem. Like it's actually, the user actually cares about this now. Whereas like, we never think about that.
It crosses that asynchronous threshold.
Yes.
By the way, is there like a magic number for what that threshold is? Is it like 16 milliseconds?
I don't know.
Or
whatever your users start complaining.
Okay.
I mean, maybe we should start by writing our like UIs in JavaScript with synchronous module loading and then wait till they complain. But like, it's just so funny. It's like something that every other programmer doesn't have to even think about.
Yeah.
They don't even know they don't think about it. Like, all right, let's pull this out and put it in another file and then require it. And you just keep going. And JavaScript programmers, it's like 10 years later. Oh, wait.
Yeah.
Like the first time you wanted to do that, like, oh yeah, let's put like this widget here and then this. Wait, okay, 10 years. Okay, now I know how to do that.
Yeah.
And have all the tooling work. It's just ridiculous how complex it is.
I mean, it's interesting because as you're describing this, I'm thinking about like, Ruby and PHP and how I don't think about this.
Yeah.
And then you describe this stuff and I'm like, okay, why does this matter for JavaScript? Like, why do I as a developer need to be aware of this? And you're outlining why.
Right.
But it's just something that, you don't think about. Like
You
when
don't-
you sit down to write your program, that's
Right.
not what you think about.
And it's almost like, it's funny. It's like, do I have Stockholm syndrome? Because on the one hand, it's like, oh, I could sit here and talk about ES modules all day. It's really interesting and fascinating, all this build tooling and tree shaking things. And isn't it so efficient? On the other hand, it's like, if you were in a programmer in any other environment, you're like, have fun with that, bro. I'm going to go over here and write my app because like you're spending all this time on this part of the problem that is, it seems, on one hand, it seems like a huge suck of resources and energy. But on the other, it's like enabling what we have, which is like the runtime in the user's device to work.
Well,
But it's like a huge trade-off if you think about it. Like you're giving up so much simplicity. I mean, it's basically the equivalent of moving from like a monolith to a distributed system. And it's like, you better be sure that what you're getting is worth it because just the asynchrony, it's the root of all evil.
I was going to ask, like, does JavaScript go through a bunch of pain in learning these lessons, but we actually end up with like a better programming model where like you can actually distribute your code, like your source code across multiple devices, and can other programming languages like learn from this in the future? Like, does this eliminate the need for package managers? Like if we have this whole static dependency graph, can I just require files in Ruby from Ruby gems without actually having to ever bundle install?
Yeah, that's really interesting, and that's one of the goals and ambitions of like the Pika project, which is that you have a global CDN that houses the dependencies that your user is running. I mean, that is the interesting point, which is if the browser is the one running the code and the browser is the one capable of building up this module graph of dependencies, it has a lot more power now to do interesting things. Like load things efficiently. Whereas on the server, since we don't think about this, we just load it all there, but we're actually running the code on the server, but now we're running the code on the user's device. And that can make things a lot faster, right? Because the browser has all this knowledge that typically the user's device doesn't have. When you're running a PHP app, the user's device is just reading HTML and rendering it. It doesn't know anything about the module, the inputs to that HTML. It's like, and that's one of the beautiful things about it. It's like a black box and it doesn't care. But the more it knows, maybe it can do more interesting things. But it's definitely like a complexity thing, right? But it's pretty interesting though. So yeah, so it just helped me making this video forced me to understand this stuff, and it helped me clarify like, why do we even bundle in the first place? Why do we have ES module specification? And I think before last week, I would have said, oh, because like, yeah, we're shipping code to the user and like you want to bundle it so that you just give them one file. That's like part of it. But a huge part of it is because the bundlers have been what has enabled us to write our code in separate files, because as soon as you want to write separate files, the only way the browser knows how to load files is with script tags. So then you say, okay, we're going to have separate files. And so now I'm just going to use separate script tags to load them, right? Well, now you have to keep track of the dependency order. And then you end up building a tool that does that for you, like require.js. And that's where this whole thing came about. And TC39 wanting to have a module spec in the language that browsers can actually do something with, because they can't do anything with with common JS require module exports, because the whole design of that was suited for Node and a server environment where all the code is next to each other, and the requires and imports can just be synchronous. So I just didn't have a clear picture until I had to make this video about why so much work and effort went into the design just so it can be statically analyzable and you can tree shake. Like, no one in Ruby is like, oh, I really wish my modules were tree shakeable. Like, no one asked that question because it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Okay.
But the tree shaking thing is one of those examples of the cool things that falls out of this. But really the idea was like, how do we load different files in an efficient way? And now that browsers are able to read, import, and export statements, they're the ones forming the module graph. They can only request each module one time. They can cache it correctly. And that's the whole point of why Vite and Snowpack exist now, because the browsers are doing that work. And so these build tools are like reimagining what our local development environment should be in a world where browsers can do that work. And that's like what this is all about. So
do you see a future where you're not bundling app.js, like even in production?
That's like what these people who are into this stuff for like the last couple of years, the Pika people are all about. And they're saying like, yeah, eventually. So why do we bundle? We bundle so that we can author in modules. But now that browsers understand modules, that's not a reason. Another reason we bundle is because of the performance reason, which is like, if our app is made up of 600 modules, even if a browser knows how to do that, when our users actually visiting our site, they're in like a really high latency environment. So it would be better for them to just download one app.js bundle than 600 modules, even if the browser was capable of it, right? Mm-hmm. And so these tools will say, don't bundle in development, but you still want to bundle in production for the performance reason. But with like HTTP 2, I think that's the vision, which is like, it doesn't matter if your browser loads 600 files, it can do it just fine. And so if you're in that world, then you don't need to bundle at all and you get to avoid all this work. So
is that because like HTTP 2, there's no like connection overhead?
I don't know.
I can statically analyze, and then I can say like, okay, I need these 600 modules, so I'm just going to request them all right now.
I don't know. There's some limit to HTTP 1 about how many resources can be fetched in parallel. And so some of these people were saying like, if you do use Pika in your project, like you'll literally lock up. Like if you try to you can require like add from Lodash, and it will like require like add depends on number type and function definite. And like you can lock things up. And there's a limit, and it starts waterfalling because HTTP 1 only has like 6 or 7 requests it can do at a time.
Okay.
I think HTTP 2 doesn't have that limit, and so it doesn't matter. It can just do it. I don't know the details. That would be an interesting video to make, why HTTP 2 matters. But assuming we're in a world where there's literally no difference between loading a single 100 megabyte file and 100 1 megabyte files, then yeah, bundling becomes like not an issue. I have a hard time understanding how that could ever be possible, because like every network request doesn't have a possibility of failure and like a handshake. I guess if you can share the handshake in the socket.
Yeah, I think with HTTP 2 you can reuse the connection, so you don't have to redo all that. But I guess you would, if the program is statically analyzable, so before I even run the program, I know all the modules I need. I could send a request that's similar to like, give me app.js. Instead of saying app.js, I'm saying, give me all these modules.
Yeah.
And just a server can do it on the fly.
Yep.
I don't know if I'm not sure what the overhead is. Yeah.
Also, just to address what you just said, it is true that the browser parses your files and can figure out what to fetch before running your program and actually instantiating anything. But it's also true that sometimes it knows it needs to fetch this module, and then when it does, that module has other things it needs to fetch. And so I don't think it will wait. I wonder, that's interesting. I don't know if it will wait until it literally has the entire module map in it before executing the first line. Maybe it does. So it's going to fetch everything. Yeah, I think it does. But I guess there's a point where, well, you can use a dynamic import Yeah, I guess it has to load everything before it starts instantiating the first module and running the program at all. I think that is true.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But there is a dynamic import. So when you dynamic import, it would then discover more dependencies at runtime further in your program.
I don't know if this is fair. I'm dynamic import has the same name, like import, but I'm considering it to be like a whole different thing.
It's
right?
not though.
But it's like a runtime, not statically analyzable.
It's not statically analyzable, but so yes, in that sense, it's different, but it's the same in the sense that the module identifier is a URL.
It uses like the same
infrastructure, and it reads it into the module map. Each module is a singleton, a stateful singleton, which is another cool thing I learned about modules. Modules have their own JavaScript scope. It's like a new scope in the language, because before that, JavaScript only had function scope, and then let introduced block level scope. Right? Mm-hmm. But like script tags share a scope. So if you have two script tags, the first one can say like let x equals 1. The second one can say console log x, and you'll see 1 from the second script.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that let. Okay.
It's not scoped. It's scoped by a block, but if you don't have a block around
you would have to have like a build tool that wrapped everything in a function.
Exactly.
Yep. Okay.
A function, or even like a if. I think let is scoped within like any block, like an if block. But at the top level, normal, what they call classic scripts are share a scope.
And that would be like type JavaScript, right?
Exactly. Just script with source, or even just script inline. But as soon as you add type module, it's a new scope. So you can't, it doesn't work anymore. If you like x equals 1 and try to console log x, it's going to be undefined, which is pretty cool. It's like a new scope in the language. And it's also why tools like SWR from Vite can use their module scope for like their cache. So they're using it as like almost private state for their module, and anyone who imports SWR can basically interface with that state, but they can be guaranteed that it's within their own scope.
And they resolve to that same module. So
yes.
Anything can modify that.
That's the thing I didn't understand that we were talking about earlier too, which is like in server-side environments, when you require files, effectively what's happening is the runtime is making a copy. It's like reading the other module from disk effectively as a copy and pulling it into your program. In the browser, it parses the files without running them to come up with the final module map of just one version of each module keyed by URL. That's like the cache key. And then when it starts running your program, it gives each module its scope, it instantiates it, and but there's only one place in memory for each module. So no matter how many files imported, they're actually all pointing to the same object in memory. So yeah, they can have shared state. It's like a singleton. It's like a service in Ember, or like context in React, really. It's like one way to think about it. So it's pretty cool because in SWR, which is like a hook library for React, they don't even use context. They just use the scope that they get in their module. And I used to think that was like a bad thing. Like Ember has dependency injection, right? So in Ember, you're never supposed to put state in your modules. It's like just a good practice. Like we export blueprints. We export class definitions. And then when Ember starts and it imports all of your class files, it instantiates them, the container. That's the responsibility of the container. So all the state for your program lives in a container that's responsible for finding the right classes and instantiating them. And if it's like a service, the service instance is going to be managed by the container.
Yeah, there are some really good things that come out of that, though.
Oh, yeah. So really good things. But we always thought it would be weird to like add some sort of like an array outside of the export statement that is like used, right?
Yeah, because exactly. We would think it's a blueprint
it's
thing,
like global
and we should give it to like a system.
Exactly.
The system should be able to create that state and manage it.
Exactly. And that's like dependency injection pattern, which is great, which a lot of software environments use. But it's kind of interesting to think that the way modules work, you can actually leverage it in some interesting ways. And for example, that's what SWR does. So it's pretty neat because you can just import SWR and start using it in many different files without any setup, without any registration into a dependency injection container. And you're all of a sudden having a reference to the same piece of shared state.
Yeah.
Which is pretty cool. But the flip side is that everyone is now responsible for their own state in each module, which I actually ran into with SWR when I was testing, because it wasn't automatically cleaning up its state when the React app shut down, whereas if it was using React context, it would have. I had to add a thing and then figure out how to reset the cache through a new method at the end of each one of my tests. But
your state is truly global.
It's not global. It is scoped to the module, but it is a singleton for the length of your program in the browser. It's not global in that it is just.
Okay, I'm being global. I'm being indirectly global. That module is a global.
Yes.
And therefore, anything you put in it
is going to hang around as long as the program is open. So that's the benefit of a dependency injection container, is that if you say, okay, if you're going to have state in your program, just do it like this and tell us about it, then we're going to be able to just clean up after everyone's state. Whereas if you just use your own module state, you're going to have to do it yourself. And so you're going to have to provide a way for people to reset your state, which you can do, but it's just everyone's going to have to figure that out themselves.
Yeah.
But it is pretty interesting to think actually putting state in a module is safe and it's fine. And it might actually enable some really cool stuff that you shouldn't be scared to do it. You can take advantage of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas I think I was always scared to do it in the sense of when we came to React and started working in React apps, it's whoa, no state here. You want to put it in the context and make sure that React is managing it, which is true, but it's also true that sometimes it might make sense to do stuff there.
Yeah. So I guess sort of putting on my things I've seen hat.
Yeah.
I feel
dark things.
Yeah. Maybe in a React app, when someone starts reaching for module state, it's usually there's a better way to do that.
Yes.
So, but I don't think that's the case with SWR. I think SWR explicitly said if we can manage our own state, we don't trigger unnecessary re-renders.
Exactly.
Just all this stuff that get out of it.
It's kind of cool to think that you're using modules, you have a place to put state that is outside of things and doesn't require you to register yourself with some dependency injection system that might not exist in whatever place your users are using.
I mean, just the getting started.
Yeah, exactly.
It's so much easier.
Exactly. And then once you have it working, okay, why don't we go ahead and wrap it in provider? That way React will be able to call cleanup every time that app is unrendered or something like that, right? But it's pretty cool.
Oh, interesting. So
dude, there's a lot you can do with this.
So I thought you were manually doing a cleanup after every test run.
Well, I am with SWR.
But I didn't even think of that. You can have
absolutely have a provider that closes over the state in the module. It's just like a JavaScript module object.
Or a component at the root of the tree that doesn't get unmounted, but when it gets unmounted, it has a cleanup function.
Yeah. And it literally does cache equals empty object. And it's literally pointing a reference to the variable that's in the module scope.
Interesting.
Super interesting. You could do there's Mirage things you could do here, big time. There's a lot of stuff you can do here.
Yeah.
There's a lot of really interesting stuff. Basically, my mental model for modules was just wrong. When I saw import /utils, I was okay, it's getting a copy of the code. I would look at my final app bundle, and if you look at an Ember app or something, you just see all these defines, right? Mm-hmm. It's defining the file, and then it passes it in. So if it's a definition, if utils is a definition, and then my app imports utils, then I'm just thinking I'm getting a piece of code that I'm running, but that's not the right way to think about it. You're not getting a piece of code that you're running. You're getting a reference to an object in memory.
Okay. Yep.
That has an address, it has memory that can be used and is shared across everyone who's referencing that module, as opposed to a piece of code that is just passed into you and that you get to run.
Okay.
It's instantiated. It's an object in JavaScript memory. If you import add from utils, it's you think about it as being code, but it's not code.
You're saying
just think about the use SWR thing, right?
Yep.
If use SWR just exported functions, how could it have a cache that is shared? My page 1 over here is getting a copy of the function. Page 2 is getting a copy of the function, and they're just using functions, but that's not the right way to think about it.
I know. I this is going to sound dismissive. I don't understand this, so there's something I'm not getting. But I would say like, well, you just have some state like let cache equals empty object, and then the functions you export close over that state.
Yeah, but that's not how I was thinking about it.
Okay.
Before, because how could they
You're
share it?
More of the blueprint.
Like, I was thinking exactly like they're just getting their own copies of whatever is being exported. And so it might as well be two different copies. You could just look at those things in isolation from each other. You could look at page 1 that imports SWR on its own, and you could look at page 2 that imports SWR on its own, but you actually can't because they're not getting copies of the module that they're importing. They're getting a pointer, a live link to a place in memory that has all of this stuff in the module, including state. That is there from the time that the program starts running. So, whereas that's not true in Node, it's not true in server-side environments. There is no state that is being shared across imports like that. It's not how it works.
What would happen if I wrote a Node module that said like let cache equals Pojo, and then I exported two functions that close over that cache? If I imported like...
If file A imports it and file B imports it, they're not going to get shared state. They're getting copies of the imports, of the requires. So there's no concept of state. There's no concept of state. The way to think about it is like you're getting a copy of the stuff that's being exported from the module.
Okay. Wait, is that... But can't you like export Pojo from like a mod...
You can export a function that closes over a variable.
Yep.
But when file A imports that thing, it's going to get that entire thing, the variable and the function that references it, but it's getting a copy of that whole thing. And so it can run it, but the variable...
And I'm talking specifically like not like a number, not a primitive, but like a JavaScript object.
Yeah, a JavaScript object. Let's say cache equals JavaScript object, and then you have a function that's like add user that references the cache. When file A imports that thing, it can run add user, and it's going to get like a copy of the cache. And then file B imports it, it's going to get a copy of the cache, but they're not sharing the cache.
For some reason, I thought these were. They're not?
No, because you're running the program top to bottom, and any changes that are made to that cache are not going to be reflected everywhere in the program, but in the browser they are, because it's all resolving to stateful singletons. Every module is a stateful singleton. That's not true in Node. It's not true in server environments because of the way synchronous require loads. We'll do an example. We'll like fiddle around with it. I think it'll make sense when we look at it. It's like it's kind of mind bendy though. It's just my mental model was completely wrong. It's very different how modules work in the browser than like other environments.
My mental model, which again,
modules basically aren't stateful in other environments, but they are in the browser. Doesn't mean that they're not stateful. Like once they're imported and they're executed, they have state.
You're saying they're blueprints.
Yes.
Not.
Yes.
See, my mental model is in all programming languages, modules are stateful, but I also am trying to think of like a time in Node where I've done this and I don't have an answer. So
yeah, because if you mutate something, if you change something in your program, other modules that reference it aren't going to get those changes.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah, we'll have to look at it. Maybe we'll have some clarifications next time after we...
It's
because a lot of this is new to me, but that's my understanding right now.
It's really, I mean, I think just going back to how you open, like we don't really think about this.
Yeah.
And that's so true. I mean, just this conversation is like, we don't really think about this.
Yeah.
So
pretty interesting stuff though. But I had like a lot of aha moments learning about this stuff. And hopefully I'm correct in what I'm saying. But it's definitely true that like the whole reason the ES module spec was so complex, took so long, and why browser JavaScript needed its own module system that was suitable for it being asynchronous all comes back to this. But it's just interesting because that has implications for our local dev environment, all these build tools. It's just like, that's why I started learning about this. I was like, I just want to make like a 5-minute video. And then I found myself a week later and I'm like, oh my God.
So in 1998, there was this.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's like, oh my God, dude.
You know that Always
Always
Sunny in Philadelphia image where like Charlie is mapping out.
Oh yeah.
That's
yes,
you.
Yes,
that's
exactly.
you explaining modules.
100%, man. 100%. Dude, and just, it's just, again, the Stockholm Syndrome thing, man. I'm like, this weekend I was trying to get auth set up with my Hasura backend and Firebase and like services. And I was just like, whether it's like loading modules or like setting up auth, it's like, maybe I should just be writing like a Laravel app where all of this happens without
like there's literally a docs page. Here's how you get auth.
It has how you do everything. And like, oh, by the way, you can just load other files. Just in case you needed a reminder, loading another file in PHP is very easy and doesn't affect how you write your code at all.
Yeah.
You don't have to route split anything, actually. No, but it's pretty interesting, man. It's like, Guillermo was on a podcast recently and he was talking about, he was on his shtick, you know, and
love it.
And just how you can get all the static parts of your program to the CDN. And like he's like, I don't want to run code at the edge. He's like, I don't want to run any code. He's like, most of the content that people need from the internet should just be available as close to them as possible without running any code. He's like, that's what we're trying to do everywhere. So like the more you can do that, the less code you need. So from that perspective, actually having like a Rails app, if you think about it, you have one Rails app and a request comes in, boom. Like you in some sense.
By the way, what minute are we at? I just want to time how long it took us to get to
what, the second topic?
Just no, to get to talking about Rails apps and CDNs and Origin.
Yeah. As soon as the request comes in some sense, you're loading the code for your entire application. And like as your app grows, I'm just trying to fetch like the home page, which is like a public cacheable thing, but I have to run all this code. So that was his whole thing, which is like, that's in a way relates to this conversation about module graphs and only fetching like pull based and only going through what you need to go through. And how it's like scalable in some sense, right? But
yeah,
it's interesting.
So yeah,
it's interesting.
Yeah,
it's like, again, I have the devils on and the angel, and it's like MIN, Stockholm Syndrome.
Which one is JavaScript?
Yeah, that's a good question. Depends on the day. No, because he'll go off and just start talking about like database queries, and he's like, oh, your database is scalable and you can be fast. He's like, but should you be like running code to query the database just to give a public page? He's like, people are writing custom varnish configs just so they can run the database every time, but their homepage changes once a week or something like that. And he's like, that's ridiculous. And it's like, on the one hand, I get it, man. It is ridiculous. On the other hand, if you as a programmer can write your entire app just in this mental model of like, get the latest thing as soon as I need it, it's very, very simple.
Yeah. And also too, I think before I used Next, I would have said, sure, you can do it, but it's too hard.
Yes.
Nothing nudges you towards it.
Yes.
But Next after writing 2 Next apps, I feel like, yeah, you know what? All the apps that you and I work on,
yep.
And even the big apps,
dude,
they could be
100%, man.
And
you would avoid a lot of the varnish, all that stuff. I mean, that's crazy. Like,
yeah. And I'm willing to say, like, yes, there are apps out there that this model, might be hard to get working.
Or the model works, but it works for a smaller percentage of the app, right? You can ship a shell, but it's not going to, this architecture is not going to help you to fetch the latest Bing transactions or whatever. You're still going to have to deal with stale data and database queries and scaling issues with databases and stuff like that. But yeah, it's pretty interesting. No, I agree though, man. Like it's just that, especially after going through this rabbit hole with the auth stuff, which I'm still haven't understood yet. What I really want is like an integrated environment, and we haven't had that in front-end JavaScript for just maybe ever, but like for so long compared to Rails like experience. And it's like,
what do you mean by integrated environment? Like you're running everything locally, or
no, just like you said, a docs page for adding auth, like just the way we do build apps with front-end tech stack. It's just ridiculous. People underestimate the complexity involved with wiring these things together. Dude, I added like Firebase auth. It was incredible. And I was like, oh, let me see how it is to work with the database. And I like clicked a button and it was added. And then like now I have authenticated database queries and I didn't have to do anything. And I was like, that's awesome. But I didn't want to use Firebase because I was already using Hasura and I wanted to get more practice with GraphQL. So now you have to make Firebase talk with Hasura. And like right there, there's so much complexity.
Oh, yeah.
You have to pass tokens. You have to have a secret. You have to create a user and sync it. You have to delete a user and sync it. It's crazy. And it's like...
I mean, but like, I kind of want to push back here and be like, just use is that the way Firebase was meant to be used? And
it's like a Firebase function. I mean, I'm going to go through it because I'm deep into it now. It might be sunk cost fallacy, but no. That's what I'm saying. Like, there's no reason it has to be so complicated if there was someone working on a next-like solution that pulled these things together. But mostly people aren't. And so it's like, all right, I get the vision. I'll see you in 20 years. In the meantime, I'm going to go make Rails apps, not worry about module loading, not worry about having distributed services sync with each other and all the failure states that introduces. Yeah, it's crazy.
And then 20 years, come back and be like... What you guys doing over there? Get this stuff figured out? Look at what I built in 20 years.
Yeah, exactly. But it is fun though. And interesting.
Yeah. One thing I'm kind of excited about is that I think 5 years ago, you would have had to buy into like your framework has to do everything. Right. Mm-hmm. That's one of the reasons that like we love Ember, right?
Yep.
The framework does everything.
Yep.
But I think now with like Next and like Redwood, we're seeing more of like, you can use React, but they're providing more stuff. Mm-hmm. It's not just, it's not you're responsible for wiring all this stuff.
Yeah, together. Next will provide you with a router. And so you have a link that you don't have to make a decision about what router to use because even if they were using React router, you don't have to think about that.
Right.
So that's what I want more of.
Yes.
Yep. When it comes to auth, when it comes to a database, those are the big things right there, auth and database. And they say you can use any database, you can use any auth. That's great, except watch me actually do it. Watch someone who's hasn't been doing this for 5 years do it, and it's going to be glaringly obvious how bad the experience is compared to someone who doesn't know, let's say, Laravel and needed to add auth to a Laravel app. It's going to be ridiculous.
I mean, I love that Rails says, no, you use SQL and you use the active record pattern.
Yeah.
That would be a huge like turnoff for me if it was you can use any database.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing is like I've been watching people on YouTube who have been doing this stuff for a while. They have been using GraphQL a lot more than me. They are comfortable with Apollo and services like Auth0. And part of it, I just need to learn it. But it is interesting to me. They're like, oh yeah, now we're going to set up Apollo and write the queries here. And I'm like, are you comfortable with this? Or do you just not know what it's like to add auth to like a Rails app? Because it's like the amount of work you're doing right now feels crazy to me.
Yeah. Well, I think about like Ember and the bet on JSON API, and like there's a future where like that pays off.
Yes, for sure.
And then it's like, oh, we have what we want, and that might be one of the scary things here. Is like, well, when GraphQL comes out, all that stuff that you got bundled together, it just feels awful, right? Because everyone is moved on to the next thing. So maybe there's still, we need to get rid of this churn.
Yeah.
And that just is going to take time.
Yeah.
There's no like shortcut there.
Yep. I was also thinking about like just abandoning Hasura and just doing the Firebase thing because like whatever, like it's not GraphQL. It's not anything I'm familiar with. It's just like a whole custom API for querying data and creating data. But like I can learn it. It's all documented and it all works. I mean, it's incredible how easy it is to get set up. It's real time. It's like an incredibly good fit for like building a stateful UI with something like React. And I was like, that might just be the answer right there. Like, and Firebase is huge and tons of people have built products on top of Firebase. So there's tons of developers who are already living in this world for years of their backend being commoditized in the sense that they are not writing custom controllers and writing specs against those controllers just to get and persist data. They're just using Firebase and they're on to the next thing.
It's an integration. It's the integration. You talk about.
Yeah. It's crazy how much complexity lives at the integration, Oh, you have to define your queries. Oh, you have to know what the shape is. Oh, you have to register that with Apollo. And now you have to call this thing. And then you have to make sure to pass a token across so that you are authenticated. And now you can actually like create a user or create a recipe or whatever. But it's like, it is true. Like there's like 4 lines of code you call with Firebase and then you can do all that stuff. So maybe it's like, maybe that's fine.
Yeah.
I do wish I like could mock it easily and like test it because I just like that's how I like working. But they have like this they have this thing that's pretty cool. I haven't even looked at it that much, but it's called like Firebase UI or Dev Local UI or something like that. I don't think it's called Firebase UI. I think I just made that up, but it's something like that. And Firebase console or something. Basically, you just run all of Firebase locally, and it's like it works. All the auth calls work. All the database calls work, and you just develop against like a local version of Firebase functions. Like Firebase functions work. I think
that's awesome.
But it's just like I want, the mocking story, I guess, for testing. I wonder what the testing story is like, how they would do that. But it's pretty interesting. It's very, very interesting. I mean, I guess building a React app or whatever against Firebase would be like if I started working on iOS apps, you would just use whatever data library they give you and you learn it. It just feels weird in the web. Maybe this is my problem.
Well, the boundary is just so
is something that I feel ownership of, and maybe I need to let go of that. But in the web, I'm used to like understanding the data transport. So like the fact that Firebase doesn't use a more widely standard thing like REST or GraphQL. It does, but it's doing it in its own way. I think it used like gRPC or something like that. What is that?
Okay, Google Remote Procedure Calls.
Yeah,
does it use like protobufs?
Exactly. But like I don't know what those are. Maybe a lot of people do, and maybe they're like, oh yeah, this is fine. Just do this.
I think even like I know I've used protobufs before. I'm familiar with them, but
you still wouldn't feel comfortable.
I would look at all that stuff as like implementation detail. Yeah, exactly. Black box. And I mean, maybe that's the thing. Maybe that's why we like HTTP as a boundary, because it lets us cleanly connect things together.
Right.
And when you have to run the server on your computer,
right.
For like, dev, it feels not as clean.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. Interesting.
I like the idea of you doing this stuff with Hasura and GraphQL, because that feels like knowledge that's portable as we work on more and more apps. Like,
yes,
I don't see us becoming like Firebase specialists.
That's the thing. It feels like a better investment to learn how GraphQL works, because even though you're using a tool like Hasura, which is like a third-party thing, all of the tools that talk to it are not. They're open source core, graphical, use SWR or Urkel or whatever it is. Apollo. It feels like GraphQL is in the same category as REST, as like the fundamental building blocks that are going to be built on for years and years to come.
Yep.
Like Postgres, like a SQL kind of thing. Yep. So it's like, it feels better to like invest in making things that make that easier to use than to just say, oh, we'll just use Firebase. But if I had to build an app tomorrow, man, I'm telling you, I would fly with Firebase. I feel it. Like it's crazy how fast it is to use. It's just like, you understand why you can't just say, oh, just use Firebase to a lot of people and a lot of organizations. Whereas you can say like, use GraphQL and then use the tools and the libraries that work for your team.
Yep.
But you can communicate a lot better about, here's how I would think about building an app that uses GraphQL versus like Firebase is like different.
It's interesting. I wonder if there's something there. It's like we're kind of like our two ends of the spectrum are like, okay, build with Rails or Laravel. Mm-hmm. And the other is like, okay, you can build a JavaScript app, but you should go all in on an integrated environment like Firebase, where it's like that in between, where it's like trying to build an SPA and build your backend that's where it gets muddy.
Yeah. Yep. But it's the community thing too. Like the reason Rails or Laravel feels like a safer bet than a Firebase is because it's like
Oh, absolutely.
It's a community.
Yeah.
And the longevity and open core and all that good stuff.
Yep.
So I think something like that could exist for the complete front end or even the middle space. It's just, it doesn't. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, it's really hard to build that. I think it would be like a moving target. Just looking at like Ember and stuff like that. Like that's what Ember's trying to build. And
that's true.
It's really crappy when they build JSON API and then people say, I don't want to use JSON API.
Right. It's a big bet. That's hard.
It puts them in a like really hard spot.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. So maybe there's something about the nature of that, of living in that space that makes it actually fundamentally harder than like Taylor starting Laravel and being able to build off of, okay, we're going to use SQL. We're going to use these core technologies. Yeah, I don't know. I guess we're at 55 minutes. We had some other topics lined up. You got to play with recoil. You got to play with use effect. I guess I ended up talking about auth a little bit.
Nice. Yeah, we can.
Should we?
Do we have anything we can do in like 10 minutes?
Yeah, I was thinking about that, but
we can talk about how much I hate state machines. Miss the good old days of managing my own bugs.
Let's talk about that next time.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Next time we'll talk about, we got some stuff. We got state machine experience with REPL. We've got use effect. We got recoil.js, which I still want to learn about.
Yeah.
I think you know more than me. I don't know pretty much anything about it.
Yeah, I think that's it. Cool. Okay.
Awesome.
100 episodes.
Yeah, 100 episodes.
In the
That's
bag.
good. And what did we talk about for the last hour? We talked about ES modules. That feels like a good topic for episode 100. Core to who we are, you know?
Yeah.
We're going to make even loading modules difficult on you. We take the simple things and make them interesting.
Hey, but we can do autocomplete dropdowns.
Autocomplete dropdowns. Only took us 10 years, but we got there. I did use this thing called Excalidraw. Have you heard of this?
No, I have a few talks queued up on it.
Oh, there's some talks about it?
Yeah, I think like a bunch like
Pete Hunt and View.
I always get confused.
I don't know who it is. Co-creator of Prettier and works on React.
I watch it. He gave a talk at React Europe.
Who is it?
I think he worked on React.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It's not
like
the guy from Reason. Yeah, I know. Right. I know his handle. It's not the guy who made Reason.
No.
The guy who actually made React, his name is
Jordan.
Yeah, Jordan
Walk.
Yeah.
It's not him.
It's not him.
It's someone else.
He needs to work on his marketing persona so that people know who he is.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. So he has talks about the actual like building Excalidraw.
I think so. I have a talk. I haven't watched it. I have a talk saved, but I believe it's about building Excalidraw.
Awesome. Is it a company?
I don't know. I don't think so because
dude, if it's a side project, bro, it's like super rock solid, and it's the kind of thing that you would not expect to be rock solid in the browser. Like,
I have no idea. I have no idea.
It's just like idea what it is. It's a drawing tool.
It's like Photoshop.
No, it's like a whiteboard. You can draw arrows and write text and shapes, so it's more like Sketch or Figma, but it does it in a hand-drawn way. So there's randomness, and it's just like a really cool way to share ideas.
Oh, cool!
But like the tooling, all of the states and everything, it's like wonderful. Like again, it's the kind of thing where you would expect it to just start being really flaky. Like think about like the last time you used like a WYSIWYG editor in the browser and like you try to unbolt something and it's just like everything
I can't
right?
I can't
that's
think
like
about
what
it
you would
I've removed those
that's
memories.
what you would expect, but like it works so well, and it's like a delightfully constrained and simple UI while still giving you a lot of power, and it's just beautiful and it works so well. It's fast. And I used it and I exported a bunch of versions of like a file and brought it into Keynote and used like Magic Move and opacity to animate for my YouTube video. So that's how I did some animations for it. Remember like we did back in the day with Ember?
Yeah.
That's kind of what I was doing. But I like the style of it, so I wanted to bring that in. But no, that reminded me of the reason I thought about that is because he's like, we can do drop downs. It's really cool because you just visit a URL and you have this code running, and it really does kind of remind you like why JavaScript is so cool in the browser. Honestly, it's really, really awesome.
Yeah.
It's like collaborative. I haven't even tried that yet. Even on its own, it's an impressive piece of technology. Yeah, it's just super cool.
I'm wondering if I have to watch its talk. I wonder if a lot of this ties into some of the ideas from Recoil.
Interesting.
I wonder if there's
he made Recoil?
No. No. He's not on. I don't know what his involvement with Recoil is. I know he's blogged about it. So maybe there's some sort of tie-in here.
I'm very interested in that. I'm going to have to Google that. Because if there's anyone talking about the architecture of that, I would love to learn about it. Also, yeah, I guess it is Canvas, but I guess they use React.
They're in the Recoil talk is an amazing talk. Just even if you're like not interested in React.
Yeah.
It's just a great talk.
Nice.
Like, when you see a talk and you're like, that's a great talk.
Yeah.
This goes into my list of great talks.
Nice. Like that, turning the database inside out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. In this demo, the way they show some of the benefits of Recoil is they have a sketch-like UI.
Oh, cool.
They did not, they built it for another UI that's internal at Facebook, but one of the ways to demo what it's good at is where you have shared state on multiple parts of the screen, but you want to share that, but you don't want like one update to update everything. So if you think about like context, if context changes, everything that's consuming that context changes. And so this is like one of the benefits of Recoil. And this isn't like Recoil only, like other state management libraries can do something similar.
It's just this idea.
Yeah. But the
cool
sketch-like editor is a great way to demo this.
Nice.
Which is why one of the reasons I like this talk so much is it just really drives home these points.
Nice. Awesome. That one's in my watch later, but I'm going to have to move that to the top of my queue. I've got like 50 videos in my watch later since I've been getting into like color grading and like DSLR video shooting and like fitness and like cooking, since there's nothing to do when you're at home under quarantine other than find interesting things on YouTube. But I'll have to move that one up to the top. That sounds really interesting.
So YouTube
it's really cool.
Pretty amazing.
It really is amazing. It's like my favorite place on the internet right now.
Nice.
Awesome. Episode 100. That was a good one. I liked it. I think we ended up on a good note. Learned a lot about ECMAScript. Also, ECMAScript and TC39 versus WhatWig. This is an interesting little tidbit. You know how like in our programs right now, we write import ./utils and we don't like put .js on it?
Yep.
And like Webpack or whatever will just find utils.js and read that in. In the web, that string that you import from, that string is called the module identifier. And in the web, it has to be a URL. So it has to have .js on it. So one of the things these tools like Snowpack does is like rewrite them to be URLs. So when we actually run it, it works, but you can still author the code in the way that we're all used to. We don't have to rewrite all of our import statements.
Is there a reason that in Webpack we do, dot
no extension?
Utils? Yeah.
Node module resolution algorithm. That's just how.
Oh.
Yeah. But it's interesting because the ES module spec calls that thing an identifier, right? A module identifier, but it doesn't actually say what it has to be. It's up to the environment. So that's why like in Node, it's like up to it, so that when Webpack comes across it, it's going to expect it to not have an extension. But then the browser decided, it was part of the design the whole time, that thing was going to be a URL, right? But this also helped me understand, like, it's the TC39 who's responsible for ECMAScript language that decides this is what the import statement is, this is what a named import looks like, here's a string that's the module identifier, but we don't actually say what to do with it. And then it's WhatWig, which is the web body that says
we're going to be
ES module identifiers will be a URL, so and here's how the browser will handle it.
Okay, so they make all the decisions in the context of the browser,
exactly,
where TC39 makes
the language level decisions, and then Node can do whatever it wants, right?
How does anything get done?
I don't know. That's a great question. It's like, it's crazy, right? It's just it's so complicated. It's like distributed systems at the language design level. It's like everything about JavaScript is like asynchronous and distributed. It makes our lives like so much harder than like every other programming community. It's just crazy.
Yeah.
Like you need a damn committee to tell you this thing is not a file. It's actually just a path. We're just going to call it a specifier, and we're going to be agnostic about what it means. And then every environment can decide for itself. It's just interesting, man. It really is interesting, though. It really is pretty fascinating, too. It's like...
I have a question that might...
funny.
This might...
JavaScript. This is like... I was like doing this and I had that guy and I was like, modules, you know? Aliens.
When you're describing this TC39 versus WHATWG, I get a little nervous. A lot of this feels like top-down, abstract.
Yeah, I know. And
it's almost like...
I have that feeling sometimes, too. But...
I mean, but there is... My life is better with these things, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, right.
No,
right.
it is. Like, JavaScript has definitely improved.
Totally.
So
I think like the extensive web manifesto, that idea coming in to TC39, Yehuda helping out, bringing information from real developers into the design is good. But it's also true that there is a lot of process. The web is also just like complicated. I mean, there's like every browser has its own implementation and of the runtime.
No.
And it has to run on like everyone's devices. So it just is fundamentally you're running code on users' devices. It's far away from your servers. You have a million different devices. You have a million different screen sizes. You have different browsers, different operating systems. It's just fundamentally massively more complex than running PHP on a Linux box in an environment you control. I mean, there's so many things that come out of it. Yeah. But you can visit a URL and start collaboratively sketching with someone in Figma, and it's pretty magical. So,
I mean, just as like a test here, the idea of me working on an app that's not a web app just feels like a non-starter for me right now. So even though I'm like scared of all this abstract committee stuff, there's definitely something about web apps that I love.
Yeah, for sure. Or we have Stockholm Syndrome. We need to go on a retreat to the east, come back, and just be like, what have we been doing? No, I'm just kidding. It is. I think it's super exciting and super fun. It really is cool. I mean, this stuff was like, it really, even just the ES module spec alone is like, to realize it's like a multi-year effort and what they had to think about and where we got today. And also the pace at which this stuff is improving is just very exciting. Yeah. So it's like, it kind of gives me even more confidence that this stuff is just even more going to be relevant and more so as the future comes, you know. Just pretty interesting stuff. So many things going on, man. It's really cool. I
want to go code.
Yeah.
This has me amped up, man. Awesome. I want to go code.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, listening. Episode 100. It's really cool. We like doing this a lot. So if you like it, let us know. Leave us a review. Hit us up on Twitter. Share it with your friends. We really appreciate it. We love hearing from everybody. And we'll see you for episode 101 next week.
See ya.
Bye.